How can we live with more joy?
You have to ask how you can get what you want in the world without having to hate the process.
What is it about David Perell's writing process that people would be surprised about?
The problem with school isn't the system, it's that there's only one system.
David, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to do this in person, and I'm really grateful for having your time and attention. So thank you.
Yeah, I don't remember the last time I recorded a podcast in person. They're way more fun like this.
Yeah, they are. So I'd love to start with, we started with high school last time.
Xander.
Yeah, and this time I'd love to wonder about what it was like to be in detention. I know you had a 2.82 GPA in high school, and you've spoken on other podcasts about your time in detention. But I'd love to know what that experience was like.
Yeah, I think probation is the right way to think about it. And basically, so I came into college, had a 2.82 GPA in high school, came into college, got like a 2.9 my freshman year, and then I think got a 2.3 freshman year spring. I just had some fun. And I then came back in the fall and basically found out that I was going to get kicked out of the fraternity. And at Elon, where I went to school, like the fraternity was your entire social life. So like, I think 60% of the school was Greek life. And then if you weren't Greek life, you would either be in theater/drama or you could be an athlete. But like the entire school was constructed around that, like a lot of Southern schools are. And socializing meant a lot to me. They really valued that. And so that was shocking. Okay, you're going to be kicked out if you don't get your grades up. And it was scary. I remember we had this standards board, and there were these guys in these white coats, and they almost looked like priests. And all the lights were off in the room, and it was candlelit. And the chaplain, he's like I don't know, he's the head judge, okay? And he's like telling me about everything. And he says, yeah, if you don't get a 3.3 this semester, you're going to be kicked out. And I had a bunch of people who rose up. Jeff really helped me. He and I had met on the golf team my freshman year of fall. Then there was an advisor. His name was Phil. And he owned the college coffee shop. So he had been involved with the university for like 25 years. And he sits me down. We're at the coffee shop and puts his hand on the table. He's like, dude, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're a talented guy. Like, why do you have this problem? And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. And I think that what was great is what I learned from that is if you hold standards, the issue is when you hold standards, obviously some people don't make the standard. But the benefit of standards is that if you hold them and everybody knows that you hold them, then people will rise up. And it's not just the people who are rising up to try to meet the bar, but a whole group of people around you who help and who contribute. And that quest, I got a 3.5 that semester, that quest really turned my life around because I realized that you could actually change and that humans were malleable and adaptive, and that if you could take ownership over what you're doing, then you can actually become better. And once you actually become better at something, then you can look in the rearview mirror and you could say, well, I used to be worse. And so that march can actually continue. And then what you realize is then once you add talent in the form of labor, and then you add money in the form of capital, and then you add vision, and you combine all those things together and leadership, then the curve there is actually super linear. And that's a pretty cool thought.
Was that the first time that you realized you could put effort into something and improve at it?
Definitely not the first time, but I think that it was the first time in a sense that I actually started taking myself seriously. I think that I always had the ability to take things seriously. So trying to play golf at an elite level, trying to play baseball at an elite level, And I was never actually that good at those things. I was pretty good, but I was a scratch golfer, but that's not like great at
Yeah.
golf. And so the average person lives to what, 80? So I was 20 years old at the time. I realized I was 25% of the way done with my life. And that was like a moment for me. I read Ernest Becker's Denial of Death, which really had an influence on me at the time. And I don't know, there's sort of like the resolution of self sort of increased dramatically that year.
How did Bill Morningstar play a role in those
Oh
in
my
getting better as a person? I think there's no story that encapsulates David Perell better than going to 3 different golf courses
Yeah.
to track down Bill Morningstar.
So Bill was the college golf coach, and I had quit the golf team at the time, so I didn't really have contact with him. But one of the things when you look at an organization, you have to identify where the points of power and leverage are. And you have to look at what are the fulcrums that I can hit and hit those fulcrums and then make something happen. It happens in companies all the time, right? Like people think of these explicit org charts where there's the VP of marketing, the VP of sales, VP of design, but you have to look at the company or the organization, say, okay, where is the weighting of the organization going to be? So at Airbnb, that's a design company. So the VP of design is probably going to have more influence than some other VP over here, right? Airbnb is a design and marketing company. Facebook is an engineering company, right? So like the VP of engineering, you have to assume would have more influence than maybe the VP of design, right? And so at a university, the reason why I want to go to Division I school is that the coaches for sports, they have more weight on them at Division I than Division III. So if you can actually convince a Division I coach to let you into the school, then you can basically bypass the admissions world where they're looking for very standardized metrics that I just didn't hit on it. Terrible SATs, terrible ACTs, terrible grades. Just like throw this resume away, right? So basically what happened was I flew out. It was like October 15th, fall, and I flew out and we went to go visit 2 schools in North Carolina. The second one that day was Elon, where it ended up going. And so we show up, it's my dad and I, it's probably 6 p.m. and it's windy outside, and we show up and I have this meeting with Bill Morningstar. That's how he always used to talk. It's been, oh, hey, David. And so I show up and he's not in the office. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I just literally flew across the country for this meeting. I got my, Eminem, one shot, one opportunity, right? You either capture this moment or you let it slip. And I realized that no one was there. So what I did was Brandon went into hyperdrive and I said, okay, where could he be? And the team is obviously going to practice Tuesday afternoon or something. So I said, okay, let's drive around to all the different golf courses. So we go to Indian Valley, we go to Stony Creek. They're not there. And then I say, Google Maps, and I go, okay, Alamance Country Club, let's try one more. And we're driving, and as you drive in, you're right next to the 10th hole, which is on the right side as you drive in. And I see these crimson golf bags. I go, Dad, stop the car. And so, stop the car, get right out, just like not even thinking, right? Just pure intuition, run out. I see this guy, his name's Will. And I go, hey, I'm a recruit. And I'm here to meet Bill. And
Wait, you weren't actually a recruit?
well, I was a recruit, but I how would I say it? There's 2 kinds of recruits. There's people who are like really good golfers who are like top tier recruits, and then there's people who had like 3 phone calls with the golf coach recruits, maybe even exchanged just emails. I was tier B, right? And so I go out and I say, hey, I want to get in contact with the coach. He calls the coach. He says, oh, I totally forgot. I'll meet you at my office at 7:15. We must talk for an hour and a half. And then 3 weeks later, by the grace of God, I got a call. I was hanging out at this girl's house who I liked my senior year of high school. And I remember getting the phone call. He says, "Hey, you're in as a golf recruit." I said, "Yes!" I run around the house. I was so excited. And I don't know how I would have gotten to college otherwise.
Yeah, well, you were in the tier B group, and when you're when I found myself in the tier B group of life, I feel less inclined to give the extra effort, like going to 3 different golf courses to make it happen. I feel more confident doing that when I'm like, "Oh, I'm supposed to be in this position." I feel that. But being in a lower class yourself, like, how do you get the confidence to go and do these things and seek out Bill in a place where there might be a lot of people in tier B in life who aren't willing to do that?
I just think that the idea that you need confidence in order to do something is just dumb. It's just really dumb and it really hurts a lot of people. Oh,
Yeah.
I don't feel confident enough to do that. Like, what do you expect? That the confidence is just supposed to be given to you? Like, you feel confident when you repeatedly do something and execute over time. Therefore, in order to do anything, in order to begin at anything, no, you're not going to feel confident. It's about the vision of wanting something. It's about the determination to get after that thing that you've said that you want. Like, taking swing dancing classes. Yeah, I don't feel confident when I walk in to take swing dancing classes. That's the point. But you're like the whole idea. I don't know where this idea that you need to be confident before you start things comes from. I find it to be like totally disabilitating.
Yeah, it is. It is totally disabilitating, and
Is
it's
that a
difficult.
word? Disabling?
I don't know.
Disabilitating? Yeah.
I don't know, but that's part of the fun of making up words. But that's something you do so well. You make up words, you frame things, you have an ability to coin terms. When did it become part of your strategy as a creator to say, I'm going to start creating my own terms?
Yeah, well, I think that also goes back to high school. All right, let's just talk about high school. And there was this kid. His name was junior year, transferred in, maybe sophomore year. Really smart guy, and he his name was Zev, and so he comes in and he said, "Oh, don't call me Zev, call me Zuba." And he had this way of speaking where he would sort of extend the way he spoke, and he would say, "Oh, bah," and you're just like, okay, whatever. The entire class started to talk like this,
Wow.
and so he had created these patterns of speech that then would start shaping how the entire class spoke. And you don't realize these things consciously, but I remember I used to do it all the time. And then I remember in 5th grade, there's this guy, Sam and Ben, and this was back when 24 was super popular, Jack
Of
Bauer.
course.
And so they were like obsessed with the show. So basically, they made themselves the monarchs and they had the exclusive right to dish out Jack Bauer points. And so Jack Bauer points, they basically had the leaderboard in their head. So they would just get you to do whatever for the Jack Bauer points. So one of the things that they convinced us to do was that if we could stare at a chair for long enough, that it would levitate. And so it's like 4th grade, I'm 9 years old, right? And I used to just stare at a chair because if I'd gotten this chair to levitate, I would get Jack Bauer points. And so all this to say, I don't know when you really realize these things, but you sort of reflect on your naivete when you're just like this little human being who doesn't know better. And you realize that humans are very imitative in terms of their mannerisms, who they copy, who they look up to, and they don't just take the things that explicitly they do, they take all of these implicit things too.
Hmm. Well, this goes back to Rene Girard,
Totally, of
and
course. Yep.
when you read that, when you read about mimetic theory, do you then all of a sudden like be like, "Oh my god, 4th grade, Zev," like does it all click for you in that moment?
Totally, totally. I mean, humans don't know what they want. We just look to other people and we say, "What do they want?" And that's what we want. It's kind of just that simple. And
Do you think that lessens as we get older? Like when we're very young, we don't have any other ability to or knowledge about other things we can do. But as we get older, is it possible that we form more of our own identity?
the way I would phrase it is like this. Elements, yes, but let me take the opposite side of that. that as you get older, the things that you have mimesis over, the things that you're imitative about, are just deeper and more structural. So when you're a kid, it's like, oh, I'm just going to talk like this person. Or, hey, but Jimmy got a t-shirt for Christmas. I want one too, right? It's stuff like that. And so it's more with like things, and like I got really into Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Never actually liked Yu-Gi-Oh. It's just my friends had Yu-Gi-Oh cards, so I was like, I need Yu-Gi-Oh cards, right? But then as you get older, um, what is that line? There's this line from a song that I'm trying to find. Um, and I think that as we get older, what happens is, oh, let's see, we had so many dreams. I guess we planned to live a life, but somehow we all ended working up a 9 to 5.
Hmm.
And that line is from an artist called Tin Liquor. And I really think that that's a powerful line. Like, we had so many dreams. I guess we planned to live a life, and somehow we all end up working up this 95. And it's like, what happened? What happened? And so I think that as we get older, a lot of things that we chase become things like, how do I have a job that impresses my family at Thanksgiving? And that ends up being so structural and core to who you are. And so when you're a kid, there's probably more in some absolute number. But when you're an adult, it almost becomes so tragic because you end up talking to people sometimes who have done things that they didn't actually want to do because they didn't do the work on themselves to investigate the basis of their beliefs. And so even if there's fewer, there's something really tragic about what happens to a lot of adults.
I was talking to a college friend, and we just saw him for the first time in maybe 5 years. And I was saying, "What are you up to? How you doing?" He's like, "I'm in law school." I'm like, "Why? Why are you in law school?" And he looked at me as like, "I don't know.
Right.
Like, I've never thought about that. That's a great question." And I stopped and I said, "Oh my God." Like, in my head, "Oh my God. Like, this is incredible. You're committing 3 years of your life, or at least, to do this thing that you don't know why you're doing. What is going on?" And I don't think it's just this person. And it certainly was me in college. So I have deep empathy for it. But like, how can that not happen? That somebody is committing years of their life to something that they don't even know why they're committing
Mm-hmm.
years of their life to.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just expands with media, right? Like how much of Instagram, for example, basically has the subliminal message of you should want this, you should look like this.
Yeah.
And how much of that is actually what we actually want. I'm not to say at all though that all these things are pointless, right? Like, sometimes you can take desires from other people and you can integrate them and they can be delightful, right? Like, I took Tiago Forte's Building a Second Brain course. I said, I want to be that. And now I'm that. It's great. It's freaking awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's just about the awareness of these things and moving through life consciously.
How do you do that though? How do you realize that the things that you want are actually what you want versus what somebody else wants, and the importance of like finding desires that are worthy of pursuing?
Look, I think that there's two of them. And the first is just to write, because one thing that's great about writing is blank pages don't lie to you, because writing is really hard and it kind of sucks. And so the only way to enjoy writing is if you're really into what you're writing about. So there's something there. There's a certain innateness that demands to be revealed when you write. Because eventually you have to stop writing about what you think you want to write about. And if you're going to keep up the habit, you have to write about what you want to write. Podcasting is very similar,
Yeah.
where you have certain conversations where there's a sense of aliveness
Yeah.
It's a spirit, right? It's like it's not something you can point to, but something you feel. And over time, you're like, what are the patterns in there, right? What is the pattern when you go to the Onnit gym and you like the energy of the heavy metal, the posters on the wall? Like, what is the pattern there? And an awareness of that and trying to verbalize that, I think, is a big one. And the second, I think, is a big one is to curate filters of people, ideas, and places that are decorrelated so that you can constantly have people saying, hey, why are you doing that? Hey, why do you do that? What's going on there? And so that you don't sort of get swept away in a subculture. I think those are two big ones.
Yeah, I remember listening to you talk about how the people who fascinate you, you often disagree with,
Totally.
and that how that like lights you up in a way. And I thought that was really interesting. When did you find that out about yourself?
Yeah, I think that my favorite people are the ones who I like, I'd be even more precise there. Like, I love people who I disagree with, but I really like the way that they think. And so when I disagree with them on something, there's something happening there that I sort of need to investigate. And so they always just force me to get back to, okay, what do I actually believe? For example, we were at, I host these education or these dinners in Austin. Invite only, have private chef, and there's like 6 people. There's an agenda, there's discussion points, and the last one was about education. And the consensus around the table was that you should really focus on practical stuff before you focus on the liberal arts. And I love the liberal arts. And there was a woman across the table. I just adore her. She's freaking awesome. And she just kept on being like, no, David, no, David, no, David, no, David. And I just totally disagree with her. Like, I totally disagree with her. But if she disagrees with me on something, I have to go back and say, what's going on here? And I have to sort of interrogate my ideas through her voice. And I just love hanging out with people like that.
Yeah, you were talking about Julian Shapiro. This is
Yeah.
kind of unrelated, but you were saying you were looking at his Twitter profile and you were saying, if Julian Shapiro does something different and I don't understand it, I have to look into it, or I assume he's right, or like it makes me think. And it sounds like similar with that girl of like,
Absolutely.
like
Julian Shapiro is another great example. Like, Julian Shapiro is probably the best growth marketer in the world. Like,
the San
what
Antonio
is
Spurs.
Exactly, right. Right. It's the San Antonio Spurs. What is Greg Popovich doing? And let's copy that and then work our way backwards. And I think that you can always look for pockets of this in the world. For example, the Tampa Bay Rays are in the AL East with the Red Sox and the Yankees. So they have to come up with systems and ways of thinking that are differentiated. And if you look at a lot of the cutting edge of their scouting, it's all this really quirky stuff because they have to be way more nimble. And they basically have to make trades where they say, hey, we'll bring you on, maybe we'll pay you less, but the Tampa Bay Rays practice harder than almost any baseball team. And then they'll say, hey, but once you come here, you'll work your butt off, and then you can go there and get what you want. John Calipari does this with Kentucky, right? You have Krzyzewski, he says 4 years for the most part. You know, how many 4-year Duke guys have there been? So many. Calipari's like, no, we'll do 1 year, like John Wall or something. 1 year, you'll work really hard, but it's my job then to get you into the NBA, right? So you have all these different strategies, and I just really like looking for pockets of differentiation. We were saying that person shouldn't be winning. Why are they winning?
So about the sports topic, it's great that you brought this up. You said that knowledge workers should treat themselves like athletes do.
Yeah, of course.
What are the ways you do this?
Well, actually, I published a piece about this yesterday. So I think that the big thing is just the concept of training and discipline and ritual. It's something that you see in athletics all the time, right? Like, you work out at the same time. It's basically like you're doing things at a consistent time. You're finding coaches to help you, and then you're actually measuring your results. And I think knowledge workers don't do this very much, with the exception of coders. Coders are actually pretty rigorous in their approach to development a lot of time. And one of the things that you can do if you want to ask, how can we get better at learning? Just look at the world of sports, because sports has a much higher bar for what quality looks like than schools. So in sports, a friend said this to me last week. I thought it was a brilliant point. It's like in school, if you're like a really good 16, 17-year-old, we're like, wow, you're so good for being a 16 and 17-year-old. In sports, if you're a really good 16 or 17-year-old, you're like, okay, go be the best in the world. Right? We have people like Simone Biles, like her twists, her twirls, her turns, just magnificent. But she's not like, oh, that's good for a kid. She's like, no, she's the best in the world at this. And that whole culture of sports, injecting that into learning, is going to be a real frontier move for schools, because the internet's changed basically everything about society except for schooling. We still study out of textbooks and from lectures. It's ridiculous.
It's crazy because you're somebody who can go on a spurt, an obsession, and you said school was too slow for me and too fast.
Yes.
And so it's like, if you could just focus, and I felt the exact same way. If I could just focus on one thing, if I could just focus on podcasting, if you could just focus on writing and make that your obsession, how far could you go? But school doesn't give you that option, or at least school as it is currently presented. So what can we do about it?
Yeah, I'm really torn about this. I think on one hand, having that sort of well-rounded knowledge, there's actually a lot of wisdom to that. Like, I wish I was better at math. And there's an element of math which is just rote teaching. And still, though, I think it is the teacher's job to inspire students. So with math, what's going to happen is, like, right now, you learn math in very systematic ways that don't vary that much from school to school. What'd you like as a kid? Like, what were you really into?
English, social studies.
How about like sports?
Oh, like I love following all sports, like, and basketball, baseball.
Okay, basketball's perfect, right? Like, if you were really let's take baseball. So if you were really into baseball, you should just go to baseball math school. So you should study calculus by studying the way that a curveball spins. Like, what is the actual difference between a 12-6 curve, an 11-5 curve, and a 10-4 curve? Like, what's actually going on there in terms of the physics of the arm, how you're manipulating it? And then if you go one level farther, like right now, the cutting edge of baseball pitching is, how do you change your arm so that it doesn't look like the ball is going to spin in the way that it does? And so they're trying to sort of get in there. Like, if you study math through that, it's so much more interesting. Baseball's like the best statistics ever. Like, what is going on where if you reach base 1 in 4, you're batting 7th. If you reach base 1 in 3, you're like the best hitter of all time. Like, what's going on there? That's a really interesting statistical problem. Why is it that Billy Beane with the Oakland A's could do Moneyball? What is it about the dynamics of baseball that people were missing? Then how did the Houston Astros then build on top of that? This isn't about cheating, but like, how did they build on top of that to build their own statistical revolution? Like, these are really interesting questions that, to young David, I wanted to learn about these things in that way. But because I was stuck, doing math for the sake of math, it wasn't interesting to me. But if I could take a project about how a baseball spins, or like I did in 6th grade, how an airplane flies, like that then is how I want to learn about these things. And so, okay, great idea. But whenever you hear an idea, you have to ask, why now? You always have to ask that, because if someone doesn't have a good answer to that, then you have to assume that there's good reasons that it doesn't exist. Not to say it isn't possible, but the internet changes this, because with the internet, schools can go from being geographically based to being interest based. And if you look at where technology is progressing, the ability to bring groups together to educate people and have really good content and coaching globally distributed, that's like the frontier of change right now. And so what you can have is, as a kid, if why would you go learn math? It's ridiculous when you think about it. Why would you go learn math at your neighborhood school and like rely on the best teacher in your district when you could go learn math from the best teacher in the world who teaches math through the prism of what you're fascinated by? It's just night and day
Hmm.
how much more exciting learning can be.
When you're talking about that, it reminds me of the idea from, I think it was Tim Urban, who said that 100 years ago, you would meet your significant other in the same block.
Yes.
But today, the average distance between where you and your partner meet has expanded. So if you think about that and replace partner with teacher, it's like, why is the teacher that you're learning from just in a short distance from you?
Yeah.
And so how can there's like an incredible idea or an incredible app waiting to be made, pairing teachers with potential students in particular topics. You could argue that app is Twitter, but not everyone can use Twitter like we do. So like what is the solution there?
I think big platforms will help with this. So, for example, like I'm an investor in a company called Synthesis that makes these video game simulations for kids. And right now, they started with one game called Synthesis. But if they have, 300 of them, then you basically take an onboarding survey. Then they find out what you're interested in, and then they automatically throw you there. And they say, hey, you really like baseball, you go do this. You really like ballet, go do that. So I think that there's something there. And I mean, the thing with school is just changing the culture. I mean, the culture of schooling is so embedded. You're going to go to public school in a neighborhood. It's going to be taught in a very specific way. I mean, the problem with school isn't the system. It's that there's only one system.
Oof.
And right now, we basically have one way of teaching kids, but like you don't really see that anywhere else, right? Like it's almost like Henry Ford's Model T, right? It's like you can have any car you want as long as it's, what is it, a Model T, as long as it's black, right? That's sort of how we think about school. And now you got Hyundais, you got Mercedes, you got old Volkswagens, you have Teslas, right? There's so many different kinds of cars. There should be so many different kinds of schools.
Yeah. How does Peter Thiel's ideas about monopoly relate to schools and what they've done?
Well, I think that schools are changing a lot because direct to consumer schools are becoming a thing in a way that they haven't now. And the thing with schools is that in many ways there's increasing returns to scale. So one thing that the internet changes about schools is when you go to college and you're going on the tours, what do all the liberal arts schools, the good schools, not saying liberal arts schools are the good schools, but what do all the good schools say? The expensive ones, the ones that everyone wants to go to. They say, oh, we have a really small average class size. One teacher for every 12 students, one teacher for every 15 students, right? What's the assumption there? That small class sizes are better. The internet changes this because on the internet, you want both class sizes that are 10,000 times bigger and way smaller class sizes. 1 in 12 is unacceptable. You should have a one-on-one coach who's actually working with you maybe a couple times a month. But then what you can do on the flip side is then you have this massive scale. And this is the stuff that's really interesting and really transformative. If you know that 100,000 people, engaged students, are going to watch a video that you're going to make the video incredible. You're going to bring in Marvel quality animation and storytelling and production. You're going to go recruit from Netflix and you're going to have them make these videos. And I mean, this is what we're doing. We are now saying, hey, let's bring in really high quality. That's why I'm building a studio. Let's bring in really high quality producers. Let's make really good 4 to 7 minute videos. Then, rather than having teachers who are delivering the information, we now have that covered. So now let's bring in coaches and trainers. So rather than coaches being, hey, this is like some academic advisor, we're going to go recruit professional coaches, coaches from the Boston Red Sox, from the Milwaukee Bucks, people who've been working in professional sports for a long time who have that ambition. We're going to bring them in and actually teach our students. We're doing high school, we're going to do adults, have them teach. For trainers, we're going to go hire former Olympians. We're going to say, hey, these people, once you're an Olympian, you're 28 years old, you're past your prime, what are you going to do? One of the great things that people can do, we can bring them on, we can pay them extremely well, and we want to bring in the sports mentality with our kids, push them, have that nurturing that you need. And then through all of that, you have these returns to scale. And so I think that you have some really interesting flywheels there. And I think a lot of those ideas go back to Peter Thiel, but I'm actually not interested in education monopolies. I feel like that's the opposite of what I want. Like the problem with school is that people keep coming out and saying, "Oh, I found the solution to everything." Stop doing that.
What do you
It's
mean
like
by that?
it's like stop saying that you have the solution to everything. Like you don't need one pedagogy, one way of teaching for every single person. Just come up with the solution for a small group of people, a small percentage of people, which on the internet is a very large absolute number. Like I'm interested in teaching a very specific kind of person how to write. There are millions of those people in the world. I'm not capable of building a writing solution for 7 billion people. And I think so often the arguments in education are about people saying, oh no, that doesn't work for this edge case or that edge case. It's like, of course, just build for a specific kind of person. And there's more than enough people there.
Does that bother you that it feels like school was something that you just didn't connect with in any way? Like, are you building what your 15-year-old self really needed, or 20-year-old?
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be sweet. And I want to have fun, and I want a place where ambition is encouraged, where obsession is rewarded, where every person, everybody who comes in says, "Oh my goodness, there's other people like me. I can actually be like me, and I can, rather than trying to follow all these conventional paths, I can use the internet to be unique, to be differentiated, to build that personal monopoly, and to offer something to the world that other people can't offer." I think that's one of the great questions that we all need to be asking ourselves. What do I bring to the table that other people aren't bringing? How am I different? And what comes easily to me that's difficult to others that then matches what the world needs? And once you start finding answers to that, the world really, really opens up to you. And I think that writing is the way to do that. And my teachers just weren't very inspiring. I was reading Kevin Kelly's quotes that he wrote for his 70th birthday today, and one of them is, "Don't work for somebody you don't want to be like." I think that there's a similar version, which is, don't learn from a teacher who you don't want to be like. And I didn't envy my teachers' lives. Like I just didn't. And I would much rather be in these classes with hundreds of thousands of people, but then also really personalized coaching where somebody's saying, okay, what's going on? And then you have both scale, both more one-on-one, and it sort of invalidates this average class size debate.
Whose lives do you envy today?
I think that envy was something I had when I was a kid and everything was so unattainable. Now there's just bits and pieces from people that I really want to bring in. Um, Tyler Cowen has had a huge influence on me, and he's given me 4 grants now for different work. And I really admire. See, it goes from envy to admiration, right?
Yeah.
And so I really admire the way he travels and how global his perception of the world is. And when you travel, everyone thinks that you're going to learn about another place. The real lesson that you get is about where you live. And I think that it's not a coincidence that Tyler has gone through this series of books, The Complacent Class, The Great Stagnation, about America, because he spends so much time abroad. And it's always the outsiders who can really see what's going on. And so I really admire that about him. And, you know, we could go down the list, but I think that once you become secure in what you're doing and you're really excited about that, you don't want to be anybody else. You just want to actualize yourself, but you realize that there's certain people who you can grow into the lessons that you've learned from them.
In our first conversation, you said it was an offhand comment. You mentioned, I used to have 1,000 insecurities and now I have 999 because you had solved one you were talking about. And I didn't get to ask more about that and ask, living with that amount of insecurities. I mean, that was maybe January of 2021. So maybe you've made some improvement on more of those, but like, take me through what it feels like to live with that amount of insecurities, and how do you go about solving that? Do you just live with that?
That's so interesting. That feels like a different human being that said that. I would never say that now. And I don't know what to make of that.
It was an offhand comment. I was re-listening to it today and I was like, man, I wish I just double tapped on that. But because that's the thing about these podcasts and about writing too, they are frames of time that we can't recreate. We could have 1,000 more conversations, but we will never get us at that point in 2021.
Totally.
Right? And it's like,
that's a nice way to put it.
And it's a beautiful thing, understanding that this is just a time capsule for where we are in our present moment.
Well, also there's something about, like, the butterfly effect.
Everything leads to something else.
Yeah, there's something with that in conversation where I bet if we tried to start this podcast over, we wouldn't even be able to redo the first 20 seconds.
No shot.
Because there's a little thing here that goes a little thing there, and then you sort of end up over there. And I think that that's actually the beautiful thing about conversation. I always say it's an algorithm for randomness. And so a conversation has its own desire and it has its own drive. And I think the art of conversation is surrendering to that and then having two people sort of ascend onto a higher plane. And it's not, John O'Donohue, the Irish poet, he says it's not just a game of ping pong. It's two people finding something inside of themselves that both of them never thought that they knew, never realized that they knew. And I think about that all the time.
Larry King says, I've never learned anything while talking. And I wish I could talk to Larry King to tell him how incorrect I think he is.
He's totally wrong about that.
I've learned so much from simply speaking.
Yeah.
You too?
Of course. I mean, because you end up in bizarre places when you are speaking and you're realizing things that are now coming out of you in places, little crevices in your mind that you've never been. It's like when you're driving through a city and you sort of veer off the main road. You're like, oh, wow, I've never seen this street. Oh, whoa, look at that house. Okay, there's an anomaly there. And then you just sort of follow that. And yeah, it's like getting off the main road, but there's no sort of forbidden territory. You can just sort of explore there. Now, there's some really uncomfortable places. Don't get me wrong. All of us have those. But I think that's what's really nice about conversation.
Okay, so I'm not letting you off the hook about the insecurities. Like, why would you not say something like that
okay,
today?
here's the difference. When you're getting into the game, your insecurities crush you because they're weaknesses and people can critique those things. And the bottleneck is always you and your effort and what you can actually achieve. So there's just things that I'm not good at, right? Like, I hate administrative stuff. I absolutely hate it. And I will drop things. And like, I was going to Canada 6 months ago. I got a 10 a.m. flight. And my buddy is leaving my apartment 10 a.m. the night before. And he goes, you got your COVID test, right? Didn't even occur to me that I needed a COVID test to get to Canada. Of course I needed one. And so I'm like, emergency, try to find a place to get the test, find it. And thank the Lord that he said that, but I could have very well showed up at the airport, just been like, hey, I'm going to have to wait 24, 48 hours, right? So, like, that sort of stuff is really hard for me. And when I started, that was a big issue. But then as you get older, you begin to find ways to have people around you and systems in place to buffer that. And now I care so much more about being way better at the things I'm already pretty good at.
Hmm.
I care so much more about that. Like, how do I become the best public speaker ever? How do I become an unbelievable writer? How can I lead a team so that people are inspired and ambitious and have this attention to quality, but still just love the work, and the whole team can come together and just really enjoy each other's company? How do I do those things? That to me is those are the questions. And so insecurities a lot of times are like patching holes in yourself. And I've said those are not going to get patched. I'm not going to patch them myself. I'm going to find people to help me. Now I'm sort of in this frontier territory where I want to answer questions that have never been asked. And often they're so personal, so intimate that you have to go through this own, through this experience of finding those answers. And I think that's it's the next phase of growth.
Yeah. I want to answer questions that haven't even been asked yet. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, for example, one of the big questions I have right now is like, how do I inject more of myself into my work, but in a way that's right, because, like, last night I was with my girlfriend, and she said something. She's like, "Dude, just shake it off." And so I ran right over to my phone. I turned on "Shake It Off" by Taylor Swift. I was dancing on the green chair, just singing out loud, "Shake it off, shake it off." Right, but, like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that right here, right?
Yeah.
That's just too far. But that's still very me, right?
Yeah.
And but then I just brought in a little bit of that into here, right? So that's like what I'm trying to do. How do I do that in writing? Like using words that I would use that have more David inside of them. And so how do you get the David, the quality, the right amount of personality, but in a way that's not distracting, in a way that's still serving the mission? Those are questions you have to answer through conversation and through experimentation and through a kind of introspection. Although I generally think introspection's mildly overrated. And that's what I'm trying to do.
It reminds me of a quote you have here, which is epiphanies are felt in your body, not in your mind. A lot of what stops people creatively is they lose touch with what their body is telling them.
See, that I still agree with. Right,
That
right. So
was
there's
more
certain
recent.
things that you double down on. Like I've tripled down on that idea. I think that's very true. A bodily approach to what you say, how you act, what you do. We were thinking of buying this company, I asked all these different people, "Hey, should I buy a software company? Should I buy it?" Right? Like, how fast can we make our money back? How does it contribute to rite of passage? And I was like, "Let's go. Let's buy it." Right? And so then I said, "Okay." I wrote up an investment memo, and then I started talking to a bunch of different people. And the people who I was inspired by in the conversation were the people who were data informed. They said, "Hey, let's go figure out what it looks like, and then let's go back to the numbers and see if they make sense." The people who I found deadened me with the way I like to work said, "Okay, let's start with the numbers, start with the data, and then work our way back into it." And so I like to begin with the imagination. And so eventually, though, I had this intuitive sense that it wasn't as exciting. Then I ended up going up, sort of doing the numbers, nixed it, said we're not going to buy the company. And my point is that a once you're in touch with, okay, where am I getting this sort of inspiration balloons, right? This sort of like this expansion.
The water bottle expanded beyond the table.
You're getting these
These are the bloopers.
inspiration balloons where something expands, like your world expands.
Yeah.
You find something inside yourself that you never thought you knew. Uh, yeah, you just go follow that, and I think sometimes we're so in our heads that we forget about our bodies.
Yeah, is that why you say that the the thinking is overrated and the just getting
Introspection is overrated.
introspection? Yeah.
Well, the problem with introspection is this. You get so caught up in your own head. And so of course there's times where you want to do that, but I think that what's underrated is just being incredibly inspired by work that you're doing and infatuated with the world. Like when you see the world from with a posture of enchantedness and you're just awestruck by wonder and beauty and love and possibility, the focus is an outer world. And I think that this is I'm not a believer, but I think this is one of the best lessons of Christianity is that it's telling everybody to just turn towards Christ, to turn towards a figure that they should imitate, that they should follow, and it is the collective looking upwards that leads to happiness, but that's not right. Something like that. And I think that a lot of modern culture is saying, "Hey, turn inward." Sort of this post 1960s, very sort of inspired by that California psychedelic culture. And you definitely want that. You definitely want that. But I think that that outward transcendence is really the place to be.
I was driving going to Sedona,
Oh, beautiful, isn't it?
and you go from the Phoenix airport to Sedona, and you just look at what looks like a different planet. You're like, "Oh my god, this is crazy. This is how is this here?"
Yeah.
And with that feeling of wonder and joy and excitement, you don't think at all, "Oh, I'm so depressed." Oh, it's impossible to feel that
Mhm.
when you're looking out at those mountains. So it just perfectly encapsulates what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, that's a beautiful example. I still remember the first time I went to Sedona. I one of the things my parents did. So my dad wins like the A triple 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 plus award for letting me follow my obsessions and just encouraging them like nothing else. We didn't do gifts. Birthdays weren't a big deal. I mean, we drove a 1994 Toyota Camry that we bought used with cigarette burns all over the car until 2020. Okay, this car's 26 years old, right? Like he was driving like one of those old Mercury station wagons until I was, I don't know, probably 17 years old. Like the entire time, I was like, "Dad, can you just get some good cars so I'm not, just humiliate." Like, we used to drive up to Yosemite in this Mercury wagon every year. It would start smoking on us, right? We'd have to pull over. The car would be steaming, and it's like 2009, right? Like we could do better than this. But the one thing, so I always rib my dad for that. But the one thing he did incredibly was he did many things, but this was the thing he did best was just encourage my obsessions. But sometimes I was always kind of like I loved being around people who were older than me. I never liked being around people my age. There was something about it that it all felt so immature to me. It was
Mm.
like it just felt trivial.
Well, was it the bullying too?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, the bullying, but that was kind of a result of being around older people, right?
Mm.
Because I loved hanging out with people who were 2 to 4 years older, and then because I was small, I was just sort of bullied and stuff, which I hated. But still, that was good for me. Bullying is also underrated. It's not the worst thing ever. It's sort of there's really bad things with bullying, and I was bullied horribly, but it gave me a spine, and I'm glad that it happened at the level that I did. It can go really wrong, but I think that when we try to interject too fast, we don't allow a lot of the natural development that I think boys in particular need.
Mm.
We sort of need to learn our bodily limits and kind of know when to fight back a little and stuff like that. Didn't come easily to me. Some things you have to learn through pain, but I think our culture right now is really afraid of those things that you learn through pain. But anyway, so when I flew to Sedona, I was at this camp, and it was like a aviation camp. It was called Embry-Riddle, and I was in Prescott, Arizona. And so we were in the plane. And I was flying in the front. I must have been 12 or 13 years old, and I was the youngest person at the camp by at least 4 years. And I remember I was like, I don't know where we're going, and so
You were driving the plane?
I was
You were the
flying the
pilot?
plane. Yeah, it was nuts. It,
Oh
it
my
was
god.
really cool. So now I would fly it. I wouldn't take off and I wouldn't land it, but in midair, it's easy, right? It's sort of getting you accustomed to flying. And so this was like a high school prep program for people who'd go to college there, but I went like in 8th grade.
Mm.
And so we were flying in, and the Sedona airport is right on this mesa. And if you miss, like, it just falls right off. But you have that enchanted orange rock, and it has that dark textured orange. And I remember just being like, "What is this place?" So we came in, went out, took off again. But I haven't been back since. But it's been a decade, and I more than a decade. I just remember that so vividly.
Yeah. It's beautiful. You've said, in describing yourself to Noah Kagan, you said you were somebody who was interested in helping others become citizens of the internet, build meaningful relationships, and live with more joy. That was the part that really fascinated me. Live with more joy. How can we live with more joy?
Well, you have to ask how you can get what you want in the world without having to hate the process, right? Like, now there's times where it's really hard and there is a grind. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that day to day, it's important to work back into what are the things that I enjoy doing that are serving society so people are willing to pay me for them. And the way that you do that is you have skills that come naturally to you that other people can't easily access. And so then you have negotiating leverage over other people. Let me give you a great example. I had a negotiation yesterday, serious negotiation with two 16-year-old girls. And yeah, you didn't expect that. And so we're launching this rite of passage high school program. And so they come to me, they're brilliant, right? Like, one of them got 5 AP Calculus BC her sophomore year, which is just insane. Other one is just great writer. And I'm talking to them, and they're like, "You should hire us to run curriculum for high school." And that's a pretty good idea, right? Like, why should we expect adults who are in their mid 30s who've gone through, oh, cool, you have a PhD, all these sorts of things? They're like, no, we know what high schoolers want better than anybody because we're high schoolers and we're going to be in your class and we're the exact target market for who you're going for. Cough up some cash. So I said, sure, let's do it. And so we went back and forth, going to pay them $40 an hour, and they're going to work for us throughout the summer. And all this to say, they're also going to vet all of our hires. They're going to be in the community to say, hey, this is sort of boring. David, you're talking too much here, stuff like that. And they're so excited. And they are making, as high schoolers, $15 more per hour than I made in my first job. But why? Because they found that place where they really enjoy doing the work and they provide value to me. So, for example, one of them is a girl named Kate. She has a Substack called Austin Scholar. And it's really good because she has spent more time with learning apps than probably anybody else on the planet. And so she can write really well about those things. That's her personal monopoly. And so then she can very realistically come to me and she could say, hey, I can help you do this. But she enjoys it. And so it's about finding that. And so then she gets paid well. She gets to work an awesome job with our rite of passage high school. And that's the sort of those little pockets that you're looking for.
How much did you turn to the internet when you were a kid?
Not much at all, actually. Like, the internet sort of, it sort of was like a mind explosion when I was 20. You know, I was just like, "Whoa, you can have Mark Andreessen's tweets in your pocket, and you can just sit on your bed, and all of these Silicon Valley people, they'll just share their ideas and opinions, and you can just learn from them." I thought that was the coolest thing ever. My college professors were so unbelievably boring. I hated class. I hated class, and I thought I hated ideas. But what I really hated was just the poor presentation of ideas and being forced to listen to things that I didn't want to listen to, the lack of inspiration in the classroom. And so that was just like a brain explosion to me. But it came to me fairly late.
So you have a sign over your desk that says strategically use Twitter to grow the email list. How did you come to that conclusion? And is it still over your desk? Because I know we're in May right now.
As of today, I'm moving my desk. So as of today, it is not over my desk. But yeah, that's just the central thing that I need to keep doing. And that's that's the bread and butter. I do think it's going to change though, because I'm just, I'm at a place where I want to expand a little bit from Twitter and use some other platforms, but also I now have 7 full-time employees and we'll probably have 16 to 20 by the end of the year. So we're just hiring really fast. And so I'm not sure that that's actually my North Star metric anymore. So it's really interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah. Well, your annual review was crazy. I don't know how many words it was, but it felt like it was a book, going through it and reading it. It was a very interesting look into your life. And I pulled out some other things about your review and planning that you do, which is at one point you gave 10 friends an anonymous survey and asked them, what is one thing that really bothers you about me?
Mhm.
What gave you the idea to do that? And what did you learn?
Yeah, I actually the most negative answer is really interesting. Sometimes you're so inquisitive that it can come across as insensitive, and I just think it's really important to know how the people close to you are perceiving you. It's scary, and I haven't done it again since. So,
Well, wasn't there also an opposite end of that spectrum, which was like he asked so many questions and I love it?
yeah, I think so. I think so. I really remember the negative comment, which says a lot about human nature. So I've tried to be a lot more sensitive to that. But I think the general point here is just to listen and to really pick up on things. Like, do you have plants at your apartment?
No.
Okay, you should get some plants. And here's why. The lesson of plants is incredible. Plants are always talking to you, but they don't speak with their mouths. They speak through movements and rhythms and patterns and they'll tell you exactly what they want. And so being as perceptive to other people as you have to be when you try to nurture a plant, I think is a really good thing to try to work towards.
Mm.
And so I think that is sort of when you ask a survey, sort of, I think earlier in my development of tell me what I need to do better explicitly. And I think the world is always telling you what you need to do better. You just need to listen like you have to listen to a plant.
I think that's one thing this podcast has taught me is
Mm.
like the importance of like what would it look like to make someone else the focus of your life and make the other person the main character? Because we go through life all the time and we assume the world revolves around us in a lot of cases, or at least I'll speak personally for me. And then you do this podcast and you put the focus on
Mhm.
somebody else, you learn, oh wow, you could treat a plant similar like you could treat a person. And there's a lot you learn in that process. So maybe I won't get a plant, but I'll continue doing the podcast. How's that sound?
I Plants are great, man. I've learned so much from these plants. But one of the other things that you realize when you do a podcast is how important the baseline is. So, for example, certain plants, when they droop, it's really bad and something's really gone wrong. Other plants, once they start to droop, they just need a little bit of water and you're good to go, right? Certain plants need to be watered, every 3 or 4 days. Other plants can go a couple of weeks. And I think that you have to know what that baseline is, because one of the things I learned when I was doing the North Star podcast is how often I would think, "Oh, this conversation isn't going well. This person doesn't like me." Actually, it was great relative to their baseline. They were really excited. And then other people were really irritated. I just didn't know their baseline. And I bet you feel this, right? Because people are so different in their tics and their patterns and their body language and all these things that you pick up on. And it takes like 45 minutes to understand, okay, what is this person's vibe, all their super specific things that they do. But once you get there, it gets so much easier. But then if you try to take that same pattern and apply it to the next guest, that's then where you go wrong.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In terms of creative work, I was talking to you about how I was listening to the previous episode and I was like, "Ah, I could have done so much better." And I'm sure you look at your previous writing in similar light sometimes. It's like, how can you judge improvement on the week to week where it might not be as obvious to you that you're getting better?
I just don't, I'm not sure you can do it week to week, right? It's almost like a baby. So when your mom is taking care of you, she's not like, "Oh my god, he's growing so much." It's only when you look at baby photos that you've realized that something has changed. But
Yeah,
then Auntie Sue, who sees you 3 times a year, she is always like, "Oh my god, you've grown so much. I can't believe it. You're an entirely different person now." You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's sort of like a baby. And so I think that if you try to do it week to week because you're so in it, you can't see the development.
yeah,
I mean, there's little things like, "Oh my goodness, little Sarah, she just walked for the first time," or little Jimmy just said his first voice, maybe said his first swear word, who knows? And and so you notice those little things, but the big picture things that really account for the growth, you just don't notice if you're that into it.
what are some things that you've noticed in your own personal life that writing has helped you improve or things that seem unrelated? For example, when I talk to people now in general, so often people say, "Wow, that's a great question."
Yeah.
And it's only from the podcast, only from asking so many questions. But for you, what is the thing or the things that unexpectedly writing has helped you that you were like, "Wow, that's completely different."
Yeah. I love just describing things
Yeah.
and being around people who see things in a new way because you've described it well. That's glorious to me. And to watch some mix of playful humor and descriptive observation, but then doing it in a way that's uniquely you, it's the best, man. You're somebody's asking you something, or it's even better when it's something you've experienced together. And like you'll be reflecting on something, be with a buddy, and just be going back and forth, and you're talking about it, and your friend says something, and they've said it with the perfect language that now you have a beam or a bar or a rail that you can hang on to as you try to process that experience. It's it's delightful, right? It's like it almost brings something out of the experience. And so I love trying to do that. I'm pretty good at that. Just
Do
because every single day you're writing.
Yeah. When was the last time that happened?
Last night, literally last night, and I wanted to tell that story, but I forgot exactly what I was describing. I forgot what I was describing. It happens all the time. But that's what a craft is. A craft is always the ability to practice. Like, you're always practicing your craft. If you're really a craftsman,
Yeah.
you're never off, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're in conversation, you're having conversations, asking a question in a way, and you're like, "I just unlocked something, because if I can do it with Tina from the corner store, then I can do it with David in the podcast," or something like that. And so you're always sort of experimenting with different ways of telling stories, with different ways of describing things, with all those sorts of things that then you can bring back into your writing. Oh, and I always say that writing is just or conversation is the first draft of what you write. Like, when I sit down to write things, like I published a piece 2 weeks ago, why you should read the Bible. I said that in conversation, each individual section multiple times. So then by the time that it's time to write, like that piece is just done and it's in my head. And I don't think that people realize like once you write all the time, you have specific sentences down to the word that are done before you start writing. You have the structure of the paragraphs that are loosely outlined before you go. You have the title of the piece, it's already right there. And so there's certain structures that you can create, and different writers do this at different levels. And so for me, like writing is fairly emergent and I'll end up in weird places, but
Emergent, what does that mean?
emergent as you write, you discover things that you knew about a topic that you didn't really realize at the beginning because the mind is basically hopping from lily pad to lily pad and the writer's mind is drilling for oil. So you're in one place, but you're digging down. But then sometimes it becomes like fracking. And so the way fracking works is you dig down, you find a crack, and then you sort of go sideways. And so you're just looking for that crack, the place to go. And so you're it's like intellectual fracking. You're trying to find some new idea. And so it's that stillness that then makes you realize, wow, okay, I actually know a lot more about this than I thought. But the general point here is that you're never off. You're always doing these things.
Yeah. Does that ever interrupt with your sleep? Because personally, that happens to me all the time. I can't go to sleep because my mind's always ideas and things, podcasts, this, that. Does it interrupt your sleep or not?
Dude, it's 4 p.m. I've taken 2 naps today. Like I sleep all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
I slept right before I came here. I just like I'm really present with you right now. Like I'm so alive. And I think the cost of that utter intensity and focus is just being exhausted multiple times. So I got up at 8, slept 8.5 hours last night, got up at 8, took a nap at 11:30, then did some work, went to the gym, took a nap at 2:10.
A double napper?
Yeah, I
W-
napped in my
Wow.
car. I just bring an eye mask. Have it right here. Threw the eye mask on. 18 minutes. Woke up. Felt so much better. Drive to see Danny.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Have you always been that way or is it
No, I've really turned up the notch on naps because I've turned up the notch on intensity. So I'm just trying to work way less hours, but still get way more done. And so when I just like when I work and I'm just like so focused and then I just want to be just like totally chill and relaxed the rest of the time.
Yeah. So that is, you said, if you're a guest on a podcast, you should prepare the following. And I won't ask you about all these, but favorite stories,
Mm.
turning points in your life, weird hobbies and habits, projects you're proud of, your spiciest hot takes. And the weird hobbies and habits, I mean, we could throw napping a bunch into that, but are there any other weird hobbies or habits that come to mind for you?
Yes. Here's a great one.
Let's go.
So I don't know what this comes from. This is so inconsequential, but it probably reveals something, right? So we'll get some psychoanalyst listener who'll email me, hello@perell.com. Let me know what's going on in my brain. So when I sit down to write, I have anywhere between 3 and 5 direct to consumer drinks that are next to me. I'll have coconut water, sparkling water, normal water, kombucha, La Colombe draft latte, maybe a coffee that I get from downstairs. Like my fridge just has all of these things and I'll bring them out and people will be like, you don't even drink them. I just like having them next to me. It gives me a tremendous sense of comfort when I do computer work. I have no idea where that comes from, but that is really weird.
What is that?
We're gonna have to ask our listeners.
Is there anything
I
anywhere
have no
else
idea.
that shows up or comes up in your
That's a
life?
good question. No, I'm not like super abundant in like I have a small apartment. I guess I have a bunch of books, but I don't think that's hinting at the same thing. I don't know. I just love sparkling waters and kombucha. Those drinks, like they're just a blast to have around.
How does it make you feel?
I don't know. You know what it might be? Might is maybe this is like uh you know I don't know. So I think that different drinks give you different energies, right? And so sometimes you need a little pop, sometimes you need something more stable, sometimes you need something warm. And I think that writing for me is it's such an intense experience. Like for me it's almost like going to war. It's like, let's go. It's such an epic thing. It's like I'm really like some of my favorite paintings are craftsmen who are sitting down, and it shows the from the outsider's perspective, the utter mundanity of the work. You're just sitting at a desk, but the inner life is so alive and it's racing. It's jazz, right? And painters who can express that, I've always really liked those. And I think that writing is very much the same way for me. It's a full body experience.
I've heard you dance and
Totally,
you play music and
totally.
like what is it about David Perell's writing process that people would be surprised about?
I mean, it's sort of what we spoke about earlier. Like you're trying to get into the body. Like that's people think of writing as a life of the mind, and I think of editing as life of the mind. Editing is revision, but creation happens inside the body. And so what I try to do is to remove my inhibition so I can have words translated from hazy thoughts in my body to concrete words on the page. And if I can do that, that then is how you get that sense of intuition. We were talking earlier about, what are those questions that nobody else has asked? It's stuff like that. Like, how do I get into my body to sort of reveal who I am as a person? Because I can be timid as a writer. And like, a lot of times the internet makes you timid, right? It's like, oh my God, there's all these people. And there's pylons and then you're as a writer you're sort of held to your thoughts and all these sorts of things. So it's like you want that in editing, but you don't want that in the act of creation. The act of creation benefits from this childlike exuberance and this sort of natural projection of what's happening inside of you.
You mentioned yourself as timid as a writer. What do you mean by that?
I just think I got a lot of personality, and I would like my writing to have as much personality as my speaking does.
And do you feel like it doesn't?
Yeah, I don't think it does.
Really?
What do you think?
I think there's so much vibrancy in
Woo!
what you talk about.
Woo!
Seriously.
Hell
No.
yeah!
The way you describe certain things, I was going through why we're Christian or why you're Christian, I'm not sure which one it was. And just the metaphors and the way you take extra time to discuss certain things, I'm like, "Oh, I could feel it building. I could feel the energy." Like, if he wanted to say the sentence, he could have said it without these specific things, and I'm happy he put those in because it shows more of your personality.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I I wanna have more of that,
Yeah.
I wanna be freaking great,
Yeah.
I wanna be great at this craft, and there's a lot of things about my writing that really bothers me, and that's why I love teaching it. The I don't want students to come to write a passage and say, I'm going to learn from David because he has everything figured it out. I'm going to learn from David because he's on this track with me and he deals with the difficult moments of when you're stuck, when you've reached the the outer edges of your capabilities and then you try to shatter those blocks and you try to ascend into something new. Like I'm right there with my students, and I think that you started this podcast off and you said, I think right before we recorded, there was things from the past podcast that you were unsatisfied with. I hope to God that in 2026, when we do this again, you're unsatisfied with this podcast, because if that didn't happen, you wouldn't be growing. And if you think that you're the perfect interviewer, by definition, you're not, because it means that you're lacking a kind of growth. And so the question always is, how do you have an awareness of where you can go without the self-loathing of your own shortcomings?
Is that one thing you've felt as if has been better for you throughout the years?
Yeah.
The less self-loathing.
Yeah.
How has that occurred?
Well, we sort of spoke about it earlier. I've just really good people around me. I have really good people around me. My rite of passage team is just phenomenal. And I think I've gotten better at just telling people what I need. And so I think that actually, if I were to go back to having to work alone and all those sorts of things, it'd be really hard. Like I'm a spiky person. I have certain things that I'm good at and that I love doing. And I'm really bad at a lot of things. Like I'm not particularly good at doing like a lot of the taxes and all those sorts of things. Like I get them done, but I need that help, right? Like, for example, like gotta pay taxes, right? So one week it's a standing meeting right before April 15th. What we do is we have these standing meetings every year where it's like, David and Peter, we're gonna do all these things. So it's sort of like building in processes and stuff to sort of overcome your own shortcomings.
Like you didn't have a profit and loss sheet until 3 years into the
Dude,
business,
I
right?
didn't have a profit and loss sheet till 3 years into the business. Who runs a business without a P&L sheet for 3 years? Now, it was because we were doing very well as a business.
Yeah.
I was extremely frugal. I put 70% of my profits away into Bitcoin and into the stock market the first couple years. So we were doing really well, but now I need to be a little sharper with things.
Okay, so you bring up crypto, and I wanted to get your perspective on something you probably don't talk too much about, which is Balaji's framing of Balaji's got a triangle. Have you heard of this? Where one side of the triangle is the New York Times, another side is China, another is Bitcoin or crypto. And it's like, I was curious of those three, just how I described it, like, where do you fall on that list? And like, does any of it resonate with you? Because I feel like you so little talk about political issues or anything like that. And me too, honestly. But I'm curious, like, where you see yourself. Where would you put yourself on the triangle that Balaji presented?
Underneath it. Here's what I mean by that. Seth Godin has a great framing where he says that there's the current and there's the wind. And if you go to the San Francisco Bay, my sister was a sailor. The novice sailor looks at the winds and they say, well, it's a sailboat and a sail grabs the wind, and that's how it goes. And it's 22 mile per hour winds today. That's all you need to know. But in the San Francisco Bay, the thing that really matters is the currents. So if you go to the wrong place and sail at the wrong times, you actually basically can't get through the Golden Gate Bridge, or it's really hard. And so the currents actually have more of an influence sometimes than the winds. And the novice looks at the winds of society, but the currents are actually a lot more interesting. Often they rip harder, but they're way more predictable. They're more stable through time, and they persist. And the reason why I say I'm underneath it is because I'm interested in all three of those things, but from the level of the current and not the wind.
Huh. You completely said I'm not answering this question because I'm outside of it in some way.
Well, I mean, I'm interested. I'm just like, hate the way that we talk about politics and the way that we talk about like the culture wars and all these sorts of things, of like this mishmash of all these people fighting back and forth. It's like, what is the topic of the day? And then everyone goes, oh, you have to be talking about this thing. Otherwise you're uninformed and you're not doing your duty as a citizen in a democracy to be reading the newspaper every single day and know exactly what's going on and have an opinion on this news and that news, so that then you can go and you can be you can be intelligent. This is what it means to be an educated citizen. And I'm just like, no, that's not what, like, all of that stuff is wrong. Everything I just said is wrong there. Like, step underneath the talk of the day and understand China from the perspective. I think it's Wang Huning, who is the political advisor to Xi Jinping. He wrote a book in the 90s and has done some writing that has been translated to English. Go read that, because that is a sort of current strategy. With the New York Times, why don't you actually study the models of business monetization and go back and read, I think it was their 2016 report on how they're beginning to change their business model. And they then go, okay, we used to be advertising based. Now we're subscription based. How does the business model then inform why they have become so shifted to the left so much in the last 5 years? So why don't you go study that at the level of the currents? And if the other one is crypto, sure, there's all these crypto wars. I'm sure that there's people fighting right now. Oh, you have, there's the Bitcoin faction, there's the Ethereum faction, and that they they're all mad at each other and all these sorts of things. Okay, actually, why don't you just go back to the Austrian School of Economics and study what sound money is, and go read these writers who are saying, okay, actually, when you print money, then money loses its value. Now, what is the effect of that? And so I'm just, when any of the examples that I gave, I don't know much except for maybe the business models of media. But those are just three examples within all those categories that if you actually just step underneath into the currents, you end up with information that is more reasoned, more intelligent, and more useful over time.
Why do you think we're so attracted to the current?
Oh, it's obvious. It's the best business model in media, is one of the best is daily news, right? So look at coffee, right? Why does Starbucks do so well? Because you get on a routine, you get on a ritual, and you go every single day. So in news, what's this? It's the same thing. You open up the newspaper or the newsletter every single morning, and then they can sell you ads. And so you are a customer who is showing up every single day with your equivalent of a Starbucks coffee. And so you have this mild incentive all over the place to tell you, the people who have the pipes, to tell you, hey, if you read every single day, you're going to be informed. So then we build this collective idea that reading the news on a daily basis is how you are a good citizen in a democracy. And, you've heard that a million times. And so, when in fact, actually, that's not the case. Like, really, like I say, actually do the opposite, right? Like, escape like the very centralized top down narrative, go read weird freaking books written in other centuries, definitely other decades, right? People who are looking at things at a much deeper level. And then once you have that background knowledge, you can just look at something that happens and you can sort of instantly make sense of it. Maybe you're missing some context. Like, all these things are trade-offs, but I'd rather have the trade-off of, I'd rather know less about what's happening today, tomorrow, and yesterday, and know much more about what's happening over decades and over centuries, and how and like really think about human nature and sort of how things work at a deep and structural level.
How much of that is informed by Nassim Taleb's ideas about the longer something's been in print, the more educational or the better the text is?
Yeah, the Lindy effect.
Yeah.
I would say a little bit less with that and more by another Nassim Taleb idea of just noise and
Mm,
fooled by randomness,
right.
and how if you're looking at stuff every single day, a lot of what you're seeing just isn't consequential. He always says, to cure yourself of the news, go read last year's newspaper. What do you get from it? Not much, right? Now, there's certain times in your life where you do want to be very informed on the news, and there's certain your work will also shape a lot of your disposition, right? So even in the world of investing, if you're a day trader, then the news really matters and your cadence of work is going to be look, 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 look. Whereas Buffett, the news doesn't actually matter as much to him because he's a long-term trader. And so he can sort of be old folksy in Omaha, just sit back and say, "Oh, I read for 5 hours a day. I go to McDonald's every morning." And he's probably just reading annual reports and books and trying to have this. And his partner, Charlie Munger, right? What is Munger talking about? What is he known for? These sort of deep mental models, right? And I'm much more interested in the Buffett Munger approach than I am in the day trader approach of something happened today. I'm going to trade on that. Like, dude, I'm interested in building for decades and centuries. Like, I want Rite of Passage to exist after I die. Like, that's how I'm thinking about
Why?
my career, because you make lasting decisions when you're thinking for the long term. You make decisions that like even just the temperament of your life changes. So, I'm sure have you seen Jack Butcher's days versus decades thing?
Yes.
So the days are spiky, but the decades are sort of linear.
Mhm.
And the longer your time horizon, the more stable your temperament. And I like that.
Did that frustrate you when you were not doing something that was in alignment with what you could see yourself doing decades down the line? Like when you were working a media job or in college or
Yeah, totally. Totally. It drove me nuts. I wanted to get to No, I didn't have a lot of the language for this, but I wanted to get to a place where I was focused on the long term much more. And this is, you said, "Oh, you need a hot take." This what drives me crazy about Web3. It's so many people who are thinking in shorter time horizons,
yes.
and it is not a place where people are talking about the long term. And this is what I love about Bitcoiners. Bitcoiners are deep about, hey, we are building a new financial instrument with decades of history and sort of intellectual power behind it that is going to transform things for a long time in the future, change the way that the economy works. And I find Web3 culturally to just be much more about trading and sort of riding waves and then selling at the top. And I don't want any of that stuff in my life.
Yeah. I had a job where I was tasked with covering the latest in NFTs. And I was really excited about NFTs at the time that I took the job and got really excited like, wow, this is awesome. When I actually did the job, it was the latest news, the latest happenings, the drama. I'm like, this is all nonsense. Like, guys, what we won't be talking about this in 3 months and we won't care about this in 2 weeks. So like, why are we wasting breath on it today? And it drove me crazy to the point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. So the focus on long-term ideas, long-term actions, long-term people has been the most transformative way that I've been able to orient my behavior to more peace.
Yeah. What's a really good lesson in this is the story of Robert Moses and Robert Caro's biography of him. Because when most people think about politics, they think of what is the news of the day, who's running for office, and all this topical information. Robert Caro, who wrote the biography of Robert Moses, saw that Moses was in power in New York for 44 years and he was never elected. And he was as close to a dictator of a major American city as we've ever seen in this country. And what Robert Moses understood was both those sort of implicit org charts that we were talking about earlier, like where does the power in a system lie? Not where civics says that it lies, but where does it actually lie? Because human behavior is way messier than straight lines on a piece of paper. And so he was really good at understanding how do these different dynamics play out. Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the next person who did the biography, was similar, where he understood what he needed to get votes and what drove people. What were the things that mattered to different people? And if he could align himself with that, he could get the votes that he needed to get across the finish line. And then the other thing, going back to Robert Moses, is he originally, early in his career, he was working for the New York State in Albany and was actually writing writing a lot of the bills himself. So he had that deep knowledge that existed at the level of the currents. And so when you operate there, then all of the nonsense, you're just sort of swimming under. It's sort of like a wave, right? Like when you're when you're surfing or something, you can go under the wave and the wave doesn't rock you. It's sort of when you're on top that you sort of get thrown around. And yeah, just a big lesson that I took from him there.
This is why I feel like the smartest people I know all study psychology in some respect,
Mm-hmm.
because that is the current that leads to all of our behavior.
Yep.
And if you know what the currents or the OS system that you're operating with and what everyone else is operating with you around, you can make much more intelligent decisions about the world.
Yeah. And I mean, our psychological understanding is just it leaves a lot to be desired. Like a lot of the things that I've always wanted to take a psychology class, where you didn't read replicated studies by psychology professors, but just read great literature and looked at it from a psychological lens. I was once with a friend, smart guy, he's a writer I really respect, and we were driving back from a day together, and we just talking about different therapists who had seen. He had seen 3 therapists, and total anecdote, but he said the more scientific they tried to be, the less useful they actually were. And when you try to scientify something, you try to find things that are empirically validated, always true. That's sort of the pull where you get taken. Psychology exists much more in terms of percentages. It's highly contextual. And that's why literature is so revealing. And I think that there's so much more that we can get about psychology from the world of literature, and not being so obsessed with studies that need to replicate.
Have you ever considered writing any fiction?
No, I just not interested in it. Fiction was always really hard for me. As a kid, I went to reading comprehension tutoring for fiction. There's always I've always struggled to sort of understand stories that I was reading, and people be like, wow, I really relate with this character. There's so much nuance. Like a lot of that stuff, I just don't understand the characters that well. I don't know what it is. It's like a weird brain glitch that doesn't quite make sense to me.
Well, you're pretty good at the nonfiction, so
Thanks.
maybe stick to that, stick to the strains. Where when's your first book coming out?
I don't know when it's time.
You're just letting it unfold when it's supposed to? I think you said something really interesting, which was like the funny thing about having a book deal or publishers or agents wanting to give you a book deal is like when you want it, they won't give it to you, but when you don't need them, then they're coming to you.
Yeah, it's just like money. We're about to hire. I'm doing so much hiring, and we were hiring for an executive at our company, and I was interviewing one of the finalists, and she was quite a mercenary, and we ended up hiring the missionary, and the missionary wanted the money less, but we're going to pay him way more. And I think that there's a deep lesson there that over the long term, being mission driven is really the place to then make more money. And it goes back to that long term thinking, that the mercenaries you can find, they got the skills, they know how to think through things, how to get things done, but they don't have hearts on fire, which is ultimately the scarce resource.
Well, David, your heart is on fire, and it's so cool to witness it in full display and in person. It's a different experience, and I'm really grateful for you having the ability to express your thoughts as clearly as you do, because I learned so much from it, and I'm sure other people listening or watching learned equally as much, if not more. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this, and follow this man at David_Perell and follow his newsletters and sign up for his writing
Yeah.
50-day writing course.
50 days of writing, Perell. Google that. 50 days of writing,
It's
Perell.
incredible. So
Thank you.
do all that. Thank you for being here. I truly appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Danny.